October 25, 1944. Off the coast of Samar. The most powerful battleship ever constructed, the 70,000-ton Yamato, has broken into the open sea. Its mission: annihilate the American invasion fleet. 9 18-inch guns capable of vaporizing any ship afloat are trained on a group of desperately outgunned American escort carriers. They are called Taffy 3. Their only protection? A thin screen of small, frail destroyers. This is not a battle. This is a predetermined massacre. But on this day, the rulebook of naval warfare was about to be ripped apart. Because when the giants of the Imperial Japanese Navy bore down, one captain on one tiny ship made a decision that defied all logic, all sense of self-preservation. He didn't retreat, he didn't evade. He ordered hard left rudder, all ahead flank, charge. To understand the sheer insanity of this charge, you must understand the mismatch. On one side, the Yamato, a floating fortress. Its main battery shells weighed as much as a small car. Alongside it, the battleship Nagato, the cruiser Kumano, and an entire fleet of lethal escorts. On the other side, Taffy 3, 6 slow, vulnerable escort carriers, nicknamed Jeep carriers, and their guardians, 3 destroyers and 4 even smaller destroyer escorts. These were not frontline brawlers. They were designed for anti-submarine patrol and convoy escort. Their hulls were thin. Their biggest guns were 5-inchers, pop guns against armored battleships. Their commander, Admiral Clifton Sprague, saw the pagoda masts of the Japanese fleet appear on the horizon. He later wrote the sight hit him like a fist to the chest. The math was catastrophic. The Japanese center force had stumbled upon them by pure chance, and now it was a turkey shoot. But on the bridge of the destroyer USS Johnston, Commander Ernest E. Evans saw a different equation. Evans, a Cherokee Indian and a fighter with a take-no-prisoners attitude, had promised his crew at commissioning, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way." The Johnston was a Fletcher-class destroyer, 2,050 tons of displacement, 376 feet long, fast, agile, and armed with torpedoes and those 5-inch guns. Against destroyers and submarines, it was a predator. Against the Yamato, it was a flyweight stepping into the ring with a heavyweight champion. Without waiting for orders, Evans made his choice. Over the ship's intercom, his voice crackled. "A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. They are 15 miles away and headed in our direction. They are believed to have 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and a number of destroyers. This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." With that, he laid down a smokescreen to hide the fleeing carriers, and then he turned not away, but toward the enemy. The Johnston leaped forward, engines screaming at 30 knots, cutting diagonally across the Japanese line. For a moment, the entire Japanese fleet must have stared in disbelief. Was this ship malfunctioning? Was it a suicide run? It was a feint, a bluff, an act of sheer, breathtaking bravado. Evans was making his tiny destroyer look like the tip of a larger, threatening American force. The Johnston closed the distance with terrifying speed. 10 miles, 8 miles, 5 miles. The Japanese focused their fire on the carriers. They largely ignored the little pest buzzing toward them. That was their first mistake. Evans swung the Johnston into firing position against the heavy cruiser Kumano, the lead cruiser in the Japanese van. At a mere 10,000 yards, point-blank range in naval gunnery, he gave the order. The Johnston's 5 5-inch guns erupted, firing as fast as their crews could load. Shell after shell, over 200 in total, rained down on the Kumano's superstructure. Bridges exploded, fire control stations were shattered, the cruiser was blinded and bloodied. Then Evans closed to torpedo range. At 7,000 yards, he unleashed a full spread of 10 Mark 15 torpedoes. The fish streaked through the water towards the Kumano. One struck home, shearing off the cruiser's bow. The mighty Kumano, lead ship of the formation, was crippled and fell out of line in a shroud of smoke and steam. Now the Japanese were angry. The battleship Congo turned its 14-inch guns on the Johnston. Shells the size of trees began to fall around the tiny destroyer. The sea boiled. At 7:20 a.m., a salvo of 3 14-inch shells connected. They ripped through the Johnston's port side like a hot knife through butter. One shell destroyed the bridge steering and wounded Evans, shredding his hand and showering him with shrapnel. Another wrecked the engine room, cutting the ship's speed in half. A third knocked out power to 3 of the 5 guns. The Johnston was mortally wounded. It was on fire, leaking oil, listing, and its speed was halved. Any rational captain would now abandon ship, but Ernest Evans was not done. From the wrecked bridge, Evans, bloodied and bandaged, conned the ship using his engines alone. He steered back into the fight, now acting as a stationary, burning gun platform. He laid more smoke, and he continued to fire his remaining guns at any target he could find, distracting the Japanese aim. And here is where the miracle occurred. Inspired by the Johnston's insane courage, the other destroyers of Taffy III, the Hole and the Heerman, and even the tiny destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, joined the charge. A line of tin cans now steamed directly at the might of the Imperial Japanese Navy, firing guns and launching torpedoes. Admiral Kurita, commanding the Japanese center force from the Yamato, was in a fog of confusion. The ferocity and audacity of the destroyer attack convinced him he was not facing vulnerable escort carriers, but the main fleet of American fast carriers and their cruiser screen. The smoke, the torpedo spreads, the relentless gunfire, it had to be a trap. Where there was one destroyer this aggressive, there must be a fleet behind it. At 9:25 a.m., after over 2 hours of chaotic combat, Admiral Kurita made a decision that would alter the course of the Pacific War. He gave the order, break off the action, retire to the north. The Yamato, Japan's greatest battleship, built to decide a fleet engagement, turned its massive hull away from a handful of escort carriers. It turned away because of the relentless pressure, the confusion, and the unbelievable suicidal bravery of a few small ships, led by the first of them all. The USS Johnston fought for another hour, absorbing punishment from cruisers and destroyers. At 10:10 a.m., dead in the water and ravaged by over 40 hits from major caliber shells, the order was finally given, abandon ship. She rolled over and sank. Of her crew of 327, only 141 were rescued after 50 hours in the water. Commander Ernest Evans was last seen on the bridge, refusing to leave his ship. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first such award to a Native American in the Navy. The battle off Samar is remembered as the U.S. Navy's finest hour. Taffy III's destroyers and escort carriers, through sheer grit and sacrifice, held off an armada and saved the invasion of the Philippines. And at the heart of that legend is a single, undeniable act of valor. The time a 2,050-ton ship, against all odds, against all reason, charged. And by charging, it didn't just break a line, it broke the will of a fleet. It made the greatest battleship in the world turn and run. This is not just forgotten history. This is the definition of naval courage. The guns fell silent off Samar. The sea, churned by shells and stained with oil, began to calm. The Japanese fleet was retreating over the horizon. The American carriers, battered but alive, were regrouping. But in the water, a new battle was just beginning, a battle for survival against the sea itself. And on the bridge of the retreating Yamato, a question hung in the air, one that would haunt Japanese commanders for the rest of the war. What did we just run from? For the men of Taffy 3, October 25th was a day of fire, and the 26th and 27th were days of thirst, exposure, and despair. As the Johnston sank, some 141 of her crew found themselves in the water. They clung to rafts, debris, and life jackets. For nearly 50 hours they floated, surrounded by the vastness of the Philippine Sea. Shark fins circled. Men suffered from burns, wounds, saltwater poisoning, and delirium. They watched comrades succumb to exhaustion and slip beneath the waves. Their only hope was that the retreating American forces, believing no one could have survived the inferno, would somehow double back. Miraculously, they did. Landing craft and destroyers, completing a desperate and dangerous return sweep, began plucking men from the water. One survivor, gunner's mate Harold Whitney, recalled seeing a ship's searchlight at night as the face of God. Each rescue was a small victory snatched from the jaws of a devastating day. While survivors fought the sea, the strategic shockwaves of the battle were radiating across the Pacific. Admiral Takeo Kurita, aboard the Yamato, was steering north, his mind a storm of doubt and miscalculation. He believed three fatal things. First, that the furious close-range attacks could only come from heavy cruisers, not destroyers. Second, that the thick smoke screens hid the main American fast carrier task force. And third, that the volume of radio traffic from Taffy 3, pleading for help, was a sophisticated ruse to lure him into a trap. His decision to retreat, prompted by the Johnston's brave chaos, was a catastrophic strategic blunder for Japan. He had the entire U.S. invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf at his mercy, the transport ships, the supply vessels, the vulnerable landing craft packed with troops. Their destruction would have crippled the American campaign to retake the Philippines and possibly prolonged the war by a year or more. But he turned away. The charge of a 2050-ton ship didn't just save Taffy 3, it arguably saved the entire Philippine invasion. It was the moment Japan's last great naval offensive shattered against the unbreakable wall of American desperation and courage. The valor displayed off Samar did not go unrecognized. Commander Ernest Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. He was the first Native American in the U.S. Navy to receive it. The citation reads in part, "His skilled seamanship and courageous fighting spirit enabled his ship to account for a Japanese cruiser and a destroyer, to damage a third cruiser, and to disorganize the enemy fleet." The USS Samuel B. Roberts earned the nickname the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. The entire crew of Taffy 3 received the Presidential Unit citation. For decades, the exact final resting places of these ships were a mystery of the deep. Then, in 2021 and 2022, a series of historic expeditions by Caladan Oceanic found them. The wrecks of the Johnston, the Samuel B. Roberts, and the Whole were discovered over 21,000 feet down, some of the deepest shipwrecks ever surveyed. They lie upright, silent, and hauntingly preserved, a monument to their crew's last stand. So what is the legacy of the charge of the USS Johnston? It is more than a tale of one ship. It is the definitive story of the Navy cross motto, "Valor is stability." When the entire structure of a battle was collapsing, the unstable, unpredictable, and utterly fearless action of one captain became the pivotal point upon which history turned. It redefined the destroyer's role, from a supporting escort to a battleship-slaying predator capable of tactical genius and supreme sacrifice. And most importantly, it is a lesson in the human element of war. Admiral Kurita had all the material advantages, size, armor, firepower, but Commander Evans and the men of Taffy 3 possessed the intangible, unbeatable advantage, the willingness to stare into the muzzle of the largest guns ever put to sea and charge. The Yamato was the greatest battleship, but on October 25, 1944, it was met by something greater, unconquerable courage. And that is why when we remember the 2050-ton ship that charged, we remember the moment the rulebook wasn't just broken, it was rewritten by heroes.